Okay, the good news is for the next segment here, it is so incredibly easy. You guys, like, this is going to be, it's, for a schematic design set, it's important to show this kind of view, but it needs almost no detail at all, like almost none. So basically what that is it's a building section. And building sections are, well, let me just Google it real quick and you'll see. Right. So building section. So basically a schematic design building section has no more detail than something like that. Actually even less detail than something like that. It could look like this. That is far too much detail. Yeah, even something like that, right? There's no information really embedded into it. It's just showing the shape and structure of the building and the quality of the space. So we're going to do that here on our project. What I want from you for the set that we're going to submit in 2 weeks for your midterm set is just 2 sections. The terminology for building sections is longitudinal or transverse. And the weird thing is our building is almost like a square-ish shape. So you'd have to define what is longitudinal and what is transverse. And I'm going to define that for you. So since we have kind of a T-shape, well, actually, traditionally, like if you have a building that's kind of rectangular, which most buildings are, it's pretty rare to see an exactly square building. But longitudinal is across the length or the long side of the building, right? So that would be longitudinal. I'll write it here. Okay? And transverse is cutting across the short axis of the building. So that's going to be this cut. Okay? But when it comes to like documentation and stuff, the different sections that you develop and how you name them, we don't really use longitudinal and transverse very much. It's more of an academic terminology. So we're just going to call it building section 1 and building section 2. But know that you need to have them at 90-degree angles to one another. Okay, that's the definition. So I'm actually going to do this from the roof plan view just because it's easier to see the whole shape of the building from there, in my opinion. So the section view is under the view tab, and it's this one right here called section. When you click it, it will activate a section tagging sort of thing, and what you're doing is you're just drawing a line, an axis if you will, across the building where you want to cut the section. So leave it on building section, and then just go ahead and drag a section all the way across the space just like this. And let's talk about what you see. So what you see is the building section tag on the left-hand side. That's the circle with an arrow that shows you which direction that section is facing when it's cut. You also see this thing over here that's called a tail. If you want to change that tail to show perhaps another building section bubble, you can click this little cycle button and it will show a building section bubble on both sides. Now, stylistically, building sections frequently have bubbles on both ends, and wall sections will have a bubble on one side. And so basically, if this is a building section, we might have a wall section. Don't do this, but I'm going to show you what it looks like. There's another family for wall section. It would look something like that. Okay, so this has a tail because it stops, and the other one has bubbles on both ends because it extends beyond the whole building. Okay, so that's my stylistic default. Not everybody agrees with that. I think it's generally speaking an industry standard, but there are outliers everywhere. Okay, I don't know. You've probably seen a fair few of them. Yeah. So so anyway, some other things that we can do with this. I want to be very clear with the anatomy of this building section. Okay, the dotted line around that is showing you the extents or the depth to which this building section is cutting. So this little thing right here, and I think it probably makes sense for me to show you the building section alongside the roof plan. So let me get into that view real quick. So if you need to open that up, you can do 2 things. You can right-click the line of the building section and say go to view, or it'll show up over here as a section view and you can double-click that. All right, so I'm looking at my roof plan and the building section itself. Okay, so I'm talking about the anatomy of the building section and the depth to which it's cutting and showing everything behind. So this little thing is kind of something I can pull back if I only want to see a certain depth into the building. So if I only want to see the sliver that I cut, I just pull this back to be really shallow, and it shows me only the elements that I'm actually cutting. That's what you see here. It's so shallow that I don't even see the mullions beyond or the door frames beyond what I'm cutting in that exact plane. But if I pull that back a little further, you'll see that door frame pop up. Does that make sense? So typically speaking, and that's, well, I can't even say typically speaking. It's a stylistic thing. Some people like to see the depth of the building and what's happening inside, soffits, doors, casework, whatever. Some people don't. Generally speaking, in a highly technical drawing package, you don't show the depth of the building section. You only show the cut. In a more, sort of small scale residential perhaps, or representational drawing, you probably would show a deeper section so that you can really understand what the quality of those spaces is and then communicate them to your client because they care more intimately about the space. So if this was like a power plant, they would not care about the quality of the space. Yes?
Why not show it?
Why not show it?
Would it make it easier for those reading the plans?
If it's a hyper technical project, sometimes there's information overload and there's way too many things happening behind the cut. And what you really want to communicate is just like what elements are holding up what. I don't need to see all the boilers and ducts and everything that's happening 5 yards down the hallway. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So again, the anatomy of this thing. These little grips that you can pull, they can kind of change the quality of your view as well. You can kind of pull this in, and it'll cut the right-hand side off of your view, but I wouldn't suggest that for a building section per se. You might do that on a wall section, have to adjust that. But at the same time, if I go into this view and I just pull this to the side, you'll see that that also changes it here in the roof plan, right? It's just a live box. And then finally, I guess one thing I want to point out is that right now this kind of defaulted to a full depth cut through the building. But that's not always the case. If I do kind of a weird wall section cut on something like this, and then I right click and I say go to view, that's all it showed me because that's all the geometry that it cut. But if I'm trying to see the ground plane, for instance, I have to kind of yank this thing down and see my level 1. I need to pull it up, see the roof, pull it to the side, and see like, well, where's that construction? So there it is. Okay, so just want you to be aware that it doesn't always perfectly calibrate the way you want it to calibrate when you cut it. Let's see. Oh, and last final thought. This is also a stylistic thing. When it comes to building sections, I think it's confusing for a line to go all the way across the building because when I'm looking at it objectively and I don't look at those bubbles, well, right now I don't know which line is my ridge. I mean, I do because I know the design of the project, but if I wasn't familiar with the design of the project, I don't know if the ridge of my roof is here or here. Okay, so what I think stylistically makes the most sense about building section is this little cut button here. It's super tiny. You guys can barely see it on this screen because the resolution's so low, but it's a little squiggly. You guys are familiar with like break line symbols. You can click that little squiggly and it breaks that line into pieces, and you can kind of pull these back, and that is a properly calibrated building section. Simple. Okay? What questions do you have? Yes?
Did you also change the line type to dashed or
You can.
dot?
You can. You can change how this looks. It's a difficult thing to do because it's a system family. So what that means is like it's a bunch of layers of things that you have, like families that are nested into other families and labeled and all this other stuff. But I don't know if you can actually. Now that I think, I don't know if you can change the line. I know you can change the symbol head, but I don't recall the line being a part of that family. It's a good question though. But yeah, you could definitely make the symbol head look like whatever you want. It's just hard to do. Annoying. Any other questions? All right. So go ahead and do 2 sections. And we're going to get them basically to this point so that you see the whole section and choose a depth that you want, that you like and you're comfortable with. And then we'll proceed from there.